welcome everybody. My name is Lycia Heath. I'm the CEO of Women for Election, and our whole mission is to inspire more women to consider running for public office. That could be at the local, state or federal level, but to also give them the tangible skills to equip them to run for office, because it's not always a transparent process. And the more transparent we can make it, the more likely that people, particularly women, are to step into that. And I know a number of you on this call are graduates of our programs, are either elected or have run before. So thank you for joining us. And a big thank you to our guest today, Bridget Archer, who's coming to us from her electorate office in Tassie. Thank you, Bridget.
Hi.
Hi. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal and the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to future leaders emerging as well. And also note that sovereignty of this land was never ceded. And it's my belief that until we reach a Makarrata or secure the voice to Parliament, then our ability to move together forward in harmony is compromised. I know it must be a crazy busy time for you at the moment, so we do really appreciate the time that you've given us today. And I think I actually want to start before you entered, official politics in your career, leaving school and your experience out in the community. Would you say that you were always a bit of a political animal? Were you always interested in the political world? Were you known in your community? Give us a bit of a sense in the years of your experience before you even put yourself forward to run the first time.
No, not really at all. When I left school, like many people, I sort of went straight off to university and pretty quickly decided that was not going to be my cup of tea. And my first job when I left school was for the Tasmanian Herbarium, which is part of the museum here that handles the kind of plant collection for the museum. So that was my first job, doing sort of some curation work there. And then I moved interstate for a little while because of a boy, because, we do that when you're young. And I did some hospitality work there, and I really loved it. And I found myself in Sydney during the 2000 Olympics and working in restaurants, and it was just great. I loved that kind of lifestyle. It's a really great lifestyle when you're a young person, not so much when you get older. And so I did that for a few years, and then decided to come back to Tassie, and did go back to uni, did an arts degree, and then some postgrad in international politics, which is probably where my initial interest in politics developed. But I still would never have imagined myself becoming a politician or getting involved in political life at that time. And it was actually after I met my husband and I moved to a new area, and I didn't know anyone, and he suggested local government elections were coming up, and he said, why don't you run for council, because even if you don't get elected, it's a great way to meet people, which it really is. And I developed a love then of that sort of community facing public service, I guess. And I think it's grown from there.
Well, that's interesting to me. So it was your husband that suggested that you should run for council in the first instance?
Yeah.
It's always, look, it's not lost on us, Bridget, how many of our alumni start their political career on local council. And in fact, we've asked the Federal Parliamentary Library to provide us some stats on how many current senators and MPs started in council as well, because I think it's considerably high. And you're one of those. So you were elected in 2009, is that right? Was it Georgetown Council?
Georgetown Council. And then I ran for as deputy mayor in 2011, and then I was elected mayor in 2014. as well, and again in 2018, and then I contested the 2019 federal election after that.
So, okay, so let's talk about then your council career. So that when you ran for council in 2009, that was the first time ever that you'd run.
Yes.
And were you a member of a party while you were doing that? Was there a pre-selection process that you had to go through for council, or was it not that that experience at that time?
No, and councils, I know they're different across the country, but councils here in Tasmania are still, and it's a good thing in my view, essentially apolitical. You see the odd few endorsed candidates creeping in now, but the way local government operates, it's best because it's a collaborative model. It really works best if people are coming to those decision-making processes not from a party political perspective. I would argue that's probably a good thing irrespective of the level of government. It's good if you can come to decision-making from a non-party political perspective, even if you're in a party, because ultimately you're there to make decisions for your community, really. But people join parties, and I'm no different. People join parties because they have a value set, a broad value set that that people resonate with or relate to. I think that's generally why people join parties. But I didn't have any party affiliation when I began in local government, and it was probably quite a few years in that I just met some people in my area, and they said, hey, do you want to come along to some of these meetings? And I met more people. I thought, oh yeah, that's something that I could get involved in, the party, and that's sort of grown from there. But I certainly felt with local government, and still do, that it should be and largely remains in Tasmania apolitical.
Yeah, well, it does change from state to state. And I see on this call, we've got people from WA and SA and Victoria and New South Wales and Tasmania. So depending on which state you're in, and I note that New South Wales is the state that has the most political involvement at the local government level. And that's, and speaking candidly, that's often been linked to why there's potentially been less women's involvement or less culturally diverse involvement as well. So yes, I think the lack of political involvement in places like Tasmania, you should maintain as long as you can at that level.
I think I probably would add a caveat to that, though, that it's that's around endorsed candidates, and it's not to say that people don't have party affiliations. And I guess you could make an argument, a reasonable one, that there's a degree of transparency, I suppose, if people have a declared sort of party position, if they have one. But it doesn't, voting doesn't sort of happen along party political lines, I guess.
Yeah. Well, give us a bit of a sense then. So you were on council, and then you were mayor, and then you had the opportunity to run for the federal election. So is it fair to say that your intention was never to get into local government to then run federally at the outset?
No. And actually, I contested the 2018 state election for the Liberal Party. As we have a sort of a Hare Clark election system here, 5 members per electorate, and I was sort of went into that as the sacrificial 5th candidate on our ticket. And I think for women or anyone looking to get involved and as a candidate for a party or not a party, it's a good opportunity, even if you know that your likelihood of winning is not high. It is good experience. I think it was good experience for me, just to run in that election. I sort of learned things. I learned some things about campaigning and how other people campaign and those sorts of things. So it was valuable, I think, to do, even knowing that I was not likely to be successful. And I think the other, what I've seen here is that, you know, if you take the opportunities, I think, as they present themselves to you, it can take you in places you didn't expect. I guess that's been my experience. That was an opportunity that was sort of, well, it's offered to me, but really I was sort of asked to do it to be doing a favour for the party. But that then opened up some other opportunities for me, because then I was the person that they came to say, hey, do you want to have a crack at the federal election?
Oh, look, I couldn't agree more, Bridget. Like, and it's something that we endorse as well, absolutely, in all the courses that we do, that and something the data shows as well, that on average it takes 3 times to run to get elected. So the faster you're doing your first and then your second election, the closer that you are to getting elected ultimately. And that changes depending on which tier of government, but certainly those opportunities presenting are and you showing your ambition are absolutely key to opportunities. So so I'm glad that you were there exactly for that. Look, one of the key reasons we run these events, Bridget, for our graduates is because we know how well informed the Australian public is on the negatives of going into politics, or well informed, overly informed, I would argue. But we never have the opportunity adequately to shine a light on the positives. So I'd really love for you to share with us some of the ways that your involvement in political life has assisted your community. Now, initially that would have been at the local government area, and more recently at the federal government level. So can you share some of those with us, please?
Yeah, look, I think it's been surprising to me in some ways. I think when we talk about what can you do for your community, and we talk about it a lot at election time, saying, I'm going to deliver this, that, or the other thing for my community. And we tend to be talking about like really tangible things like infrastructure, and in fact our communities sometimes kind of have an expectation that that's what their elected representatives are going to deliver.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that's true, of course, and any elected representative is going to be able to deliver some of those things. And I think if you are doing that job well, hopefully you're delivering things that your community actually wants. But I think what's been really pleasing for me, and something that I think really motivates me, is some of the smaller things, and sometimes they're things that might only affect 1 or 2 or a small group of people, and they're not kind of broadcast to the world and those sorts of things, but they're immensely satisfying, I think, and they're the things that I think for me, and I suspect probably for other women, are the types of things that we want to get involved in public life, because we want to make a bit of a difference in the world, or a difference to our communities. And I know with some of the speeches that I've given on various things, domestic and family violence, for example, child sexual abuse as a couple of examples, I've been so struck by the impact that's made to individual people, and the correspondence that you then get from people about what that means for them, but also the loop of that is they then provide more information for you to be able to go a bit further, or to see some part of the puzzle that you couldn't see before because you're being informed. And so I think that's been, one of the most positive and probably surprising things to me, and just learning what is going on in your community, or what's happening across a whole range of different policy sort of areas. That's been really, really, really positive, I think, for me. But it started, and it probably remains, about that local impact, about people in your community, where you are, and trying to make that a better place, you know, and that's really what motivates me. You know, I love when you get these, even at an electorate level, people that you've helped with a particular problem, and it can be a whole range of different things, and we don't often see that side of what elected members do. But that some of that stuff, I think it's very important, you know, and it's important in the lives of those individual people, and that makes a difference, I think. So I think sometimes we look at the big picture, you know, save the world sort of policy sort of stuff, but that grassroots, I think that grassroots stuff is really important, and I think it's often forgotten, particularly now in a kind of modern tribal political environment, that, you know, I think there's some benefit, and I think it's something that actually women can do really well, and is one of the other reasons I think it would be great to see more women involved in political life, because I think that they have that more grassroots personal connections to communities that are really important. And that's how it used to be. I think it used to be in local government, you know, and probably other tiers of government where you know, we used to elect people that were well known and trusted. I think trusted is important in our communities, and I think that's gone by the by a little bit, and I think I'd like to bring it back with, you know, some women.
Well, you know, well, there's so many bits that I could pull out of what you've just said, Bridget, but I think you know, we want to bring it back too. And this is, you know, you're over my shoulder here, you know, power like you've never seen. And the white writing there is, if you care, you're qualified. And this linking this, you know, wonderful power that we see women exhibit for their communities every day all across the country, because they want to do good for their communities, and linking that that power to political power, and showing what they're already doing for their community is utterly transferable to political office, and what we need and want there as well. But so, and that is one of the reasons we formed our parliamentary friendship group in Canberra as well. And we're so delighted that you are one of the co-chairs of that group. To achieve just that in Canberra, but that filters down to other levels of government as well. Yeah. So in terms of more women entering politics, then we know there's increased barriers for women, and you know, our own research and data and the different focus groups that Women for Election have done have brought it down to 5 key barriers, the 5 C's we call them: cash, confidence, caring requirements, culture, political culture in particular, and candidate selection as well. And, you know, our courses address each of those pieces. In the time you've been in politics, whether it's local or federal, have you seen those barriers reduce? Do you think they're the same that they've been through that time? Can you shine a bit of a light on that for us, and what you think particularly might still be needing to be done?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I've seen those things reduce, but probably only marginally. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in that regard, and I think it's probably representative of society generally, to be honest. Like, I don't think it's confined just to politics. It's, you know, I think women in all spheres of life are often challenged by many of those things. For me, cash was definitely a barrier, and you know, I just didn't have any. That was the bottom line, you know, like I'd had
Problem.
sort of casual insecure jobs, like they're the only jobs I've ever had. And actually, even last week, I was joking that I earn more money now, but member for Bass is pretty insecure work as well. But it's I didn't have any money. When I first stood for local government, I had a 4-year-old and a 10-month-old baby. I had another 3 babies while I was on the council, and I think that's one of the issues I feel is those caring responsibilities for women, and it's difficult to find a way to accommodate it in some ways because, as I said, for example, I had gave birth to 3 babies while I was on the council. My last baby was born like a month after I was elected mayor the first time. And in theory, you could take some leave, but the reality is, as an elected member, it's very hard to do that. And I don't think society's still quite at a point, and that's something I think collectively we need to work on, that where it is accepted that people either will take some leave or that there'll be some other kind of accommodations. And I have a very vivid memory of the longest amount of time I had off when I had those babies was a week with my last child, and that was because I nearly bled to death. And then I was, back chairing a meeting sort of a week later. That's a bit of a barrier for people, I think, caring responsibilities, because we say the words like, I think that this is a society issue. We say the words about, making environments more family friendly or whatever, but actually in practice, they're really not. And we're seeing that in the federal parliament even now, with the new government, who've made some like positive attempts to try and make parliament, for example, a bit more family friendly, but it's kind of not really, because we're coming from all over the country. Obviously, if you've got school age children, you're not taking them with you to Canberra. So some people with very young children or babies are obviously able to take them with them, and potentially we're not having divisions and things like that after 6:30 now. But even in the last sitting week, we were sitting one night, sat till 10:30 or something. And so it's the words don't match the kind of what actually happens in practice. And I think we're still overwhelmingly seeing women bearing the burden of caring responsibilities as well, which again, I think is a sort of wider society issue. So that's just on the caring side, and the cash side. I think some of those other things are certainly barriers. Candidate selection probably comes up against some of those other barriers. And the very first question that I was asked in both my pre-selections was, how are you going to cope with your children if you're elected?
Yeah.
And I'm 100% certain that no male candidates were asked that same question, but that was the first question that I was asked. Not could I do the job or what could I bring, but how I was going to cope.
Yeah. We have heard that from other guests as well, Bridget. So I find that is consistent. And so much, caring responsibilities is funny how much of it is policy, has solution within policy as well, which is again a key driver of getting that lived experience into those decision-making tables, isn't it? That ends up being the positive feedback loop in many ways.
I think so. I think the more people that are having to manage those issues, then obviously the greater weight there is to do something about addressing them in a positive, in a productive way.
Yes, absolutely. So moving on then to Canberra and your time in, and it's been a busy last year, Bridget, for you and for us, because it was basically almost to the day 1 year ago that you crossed the floor in federal parliament in support of Helen Haynes' federal ICAC bill, the NAC, National Anti-Corruption Commission bill. That was November last year, and it got considerable press. You did it again along with 4 of your colleagues in earlier this year in Feb in relation to trying to get additional protections for transgender children. And again, post the federal election in August, if I've got that right, but I think you might have crossed the floor on your own in that particular moment, and that was in relation to climate policy. Like that is an extraordinary record over the last 12 months, Bridget, I must say, and no doubt it would have been extremely difficult. If I just try to put myself in your position, values-based or not, and I am not diminishing values-based leadership there at all, but it is still a difficult position to find yourself in. Can you talk with us, please, about your decision-making process for each of those? I mean, in 5 minutes, but can you, in terms of political future, in terms of things that might come down the pipe at you, in terms of your own value set, how do you work in all of that universe of decision making to get to a place where you know what you're going to do?
It's got easier, I have to say. The first time it was really, really hard. And it was one of those moments for me when I stood to second Helen's motion, which was really just to debate the bill. Like, it was nothing earth-shattering. Like, can we just talk about this? It was like one of those moments where you feel like everything stopped around you, and I felt this weight of what I was doing at the time. Like, I just felt that it was so important and so necessary, and I was really frustrated, I think, at the continual lack of action on it, given that we as a government had actually taken it to an election, had put together a bill that had been pretty resoundingly criticised, which we hadn't even introduced to the parliament. Like, the draft exposure bill had been pretty roundly criticised. And then it was Helen, with a bill that she put a lot of work into that I thought was pretty good and worth, start with that and work backwards. But I felt frustrated that we couldn't even get to the point of debating it. So I think that was what initially I thought, well, the way that the parliament was constituted because of the COVID restrictions and things like that was, in my view, it had all become quite undemocratic in a way. So we knew that motion would be unlikely to succeed because we didn't have the numbers, but because we needed an absolute majority. But we still decided that it was worth going ahead because it highlighted that, and I think it did, as you say, sort of, I think, light a bit of a fire under the issue of integrity. And many women, and I think it's a great thing, but many women have been elected at the last election because of integrity, and I had no doubt that that was the case. But I thought I was going to die when I stood up, and the world just sort of stopped, and it was probably the first time in the federal parliament actually that I spoke with no notes. I just said what I felt, and then I think it was only after I sat down that I thought, okay, like, there's consequences to what I've done now. And I think that realization that I wouldn't have changed what I was going to do, but, you know, I don't think I'd prepared myself for what the consequences might be before I did it. And so immediately afterwards, I thought, oh, okay, well, now I need to sort of prepare for what is to come. And that was a really hard time, actually. Subsequently, I think, particularly on the religious discrimination bill, it became easier, I guess, because I think on that bill, I remember saying at the time that I just made peace with it, I think, by then, that these things are so important that it doesn't matter what the consequences are. And I was so pleased when that bill was withdrawn from the Senate and effectively failed. And if I had have left the Parliament at that time, I would be 100% satisfied with the contribution that I'd made. And I think that's the decision-making process. When I stopped and reflected on that, that's the decision-making process, I think, that I have had on each of those occasions is, what am I here for? Like, we talk a lot about the privilege of being elected, and it is a great privilege, but we don't reflect often enough, I think, on the responsibility. And I feel this enormous responsibility, both to the people that have elected me, which is why we're there, but also I think going back on some of those things we're talking about before, anybody that tells you it's not going to cost you something, as a woman particularly, and if you've got caregiving roles and whatever, it's going to cost you something to get involved in political life, and you and other people around you make sacrifices for you to be able to do that. And I think that for me, and my advice to anyone else considering it is, you know, you want to make sure that that's worth it. And, you know, I've said recently, you can't die on every hill, but you should be prepared to die on one. Pick one that you're prepared to, you know, to die on, I think. But I do think you have to be pragmatic about that as well, because I think that if you die on every hill, it's hard for people to kind of take you seriously when you really mean it. Yeah. And so I think for me, that was the decision making, that it's got to mean something, and those are things that are actually life and death for some people. And I was very energised by stories of constituents for whom that religious discrimination bill was literally life and death for them.
Thank you so much for sharing some of that with us. And from your statement, it got easier. It did make me laugh, but but I understand.
I still think it's probably, like, I mean, to be honest, like, I think it's career limiting as well, you know, but whatever.
Well, it depends what your ambitions are as well, doesn't it? So, you know, is it political ambitions or ambitions for your community, you know, and all the other ambitions in between? So, you know,
you need to decide that. You know, I think if you're politically ambitious, then I probably wouldn't recommend that as a course of action, because it won't work out well for you.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because, you know, and obviously consequences and so forth. And if I'm right, one of those consequences was a swing towards you in the federal election. So, you know, there's consequences and consequences, I guess. So, but in particular, I think when you were undertaking that, you know, on the 3 times that you did you find that Parliament was supportive in terms of the members that were there, or outreach across party lines? Was it isolating time? We're always keen to know what it's actually like versus what it might be shown like in the media.
Yeah, it was it was difficult. It was certainly isolating, and you know, some people are, and certainly across the parliament, some people were amazing, and it was across party lines.
Glad to hear it.
Predominantly women. You know, women are very supportive too, and you know, people will reach out, and people in my party, people in other parties, and obviously across on the crossbench and whatever. So, you know, I think that's one of the challenging things about politics, though, too, is that sometimes the politics gets in the way a bit, because people will reach out. You know, I have great relationships across the parliament with everyone, you know, but that's not generally, you know, the public environment that you live in. And I don't know, I find that a little bit challenging too, because I'm really a kind of say what you mean what you say sort of person. So I find that a little bit difficult. Other people might find that easier to deal with, but you know, the support will be there, but it's private. And I think in this sort of role, and something that I think people should be prepared for, is that generally speaking, public criticism is a lot more vocal and difficult than like public praise. Like you'll get praise or support might come privately, or people say, oh, good on you, or that was the right thing to do, or whatever. But criticism is very public, and that can be difficult, I think, to you know, psychologically to deal with. So I don't really have the answer to that, because I still find that a little bit difficult to deal with.
Yeah, well, it's something really interesting that you raise. Praise will come privately, the criticism is public. I haven't actually heard it articulated that way before, but it's, I mean, it would appear true. So it doesn't mean you're not getting the equivalent quantum on both sides, but yes, I could see that it would be hard to deal with. That's hard to do, and hard for your family to deal with as well.
Yeah. It is particularly difficult for your family to deal with as well. But I think it's also because it's the public part that is often what is influential to other people as well. So it's all very well for someone to privately say to you, oh, you know, like I respect what you've done or whatever. But if they're publicly, and often it'll be the same people, if they're publicly playing politics with that or criticising, that can be very, I think that can be very challenging. I don't know what you do about it, but I try not to do that. Like I think it's a bit of a barrier to everybody participating, because I think a lot of people go, oh, gee, I don't want to put myself in the way of that. And I think you need to know that generally there is support there for you behind the scenes, but it sometimes doesn't help if they're still going out and flogging you publicly.
So I think one of the key reasons we established our parliamentary friendship group in Canberra was to provide a forum, and you know, we'll be running events you know, in 2023 in Parliament House as in part a support mechanism for currently elected MPs, senators and their staff to come together in a forum that is supportive and does listen to you know, the issues that are going on, to try to formulate ways to improve them as well. So is there formal or informal forums that you can get together in such a way in Canberra currently, cross-party?
Yeah, the parliamentary friendship groups are the kind of formal mechanism probably, and they're great, and then they cover a whole range of different areas. So people have particular areas of interest, like co-chair Parliamentary Friends of Women's Health, for example, and some others. But so they are a great kind of formal but non-partisan, which I think is important way to connect about issues that are important and find some common ground. And I think that's about recognising that for those of us within parties, whatever party you're in, there's some things that are easier to do or not do, or promote or not promote. And I think it's quite useful actually having some of those groups that allow for a bit of cross-pollination of ideas, so that you might be able to get some of those ideas going in another party or whatever as well. I think that informally people generally get on really well informally, and they do spend, I catch up with lots of different people across the political spectrum for a coffee here or here and there, or dinner or something, just for a chat. What I do notice is just, and it goes to the point that I made before, and I think it's something that collectively we can kind of break down. It's part of that tribalism that I was talking about. But the crossbench actually does manage this really well. And last sitting week was a really good example of the industrial relations legislation, for example. And the crossbench was divided on that legislation because, unsurprisingly, representing their particular communities. But there was no criticism amongst them or between them about who decided to vote in which way. They don't always vote as a homogenous group because they're independents, right? But when they do vote differently, they never criticise each other. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic. And I think that, it's an approach that I try to take forward, is that we should be, whichever party we're in, and like it's harder for some parties, like the Labor Party's particular rules about what they can and can't do, and that's fine. But I think where people sort of make decisions, it becomes kind of this political fodder, whereas it's really interesting the way that the crossbench deals with that. They go there, they represent their communities, they make a decision. That's what democracy should look like. And I think that, it is, again, it's something I think women naturally really do quite well, is that collaboration and consensus style of politics. So I think the more women that we could get in, I think we would start to break down some of that tribalism that currently exists.
Yes, I agree with you, and Women for Election agrees with you, and that's the intent for that formal forum, from that will officially launch next year as well. If we can all make it to Christmas in the meantime, Bridget. Well, look, that was really my last question. So we've opened it up to questions in the chat. I think it's manageable that if people want to take themselves off mic to ask their question, then you are more than welcome to, as long as there's no crazy feedback in the background. And then, Bridget, I know we don't have you any later than 2:00, and preferably off by 1:55. So Philippa, do you want to ask your question off mic? Would you prefer that?
Yeah, happy to do that. I wasn't exactly sure of the protocol. Thank you so much, Bridget. I totally respect and admire your values and your ethics and the way you go about doing things. And I really concur with your comment about public criticism and the personalisation of it. And I do like to listen to a lot of media from around the world, and I do have an opinion that Australian media tends to be very much opinion driven, and I'm not necessarily criticising them. I know part of their role is to hold people to account, but I just wonder about where you see the media in the Australian landscape, and is there a way that can be changed, and what are your views on influencing the way that things are reported on in Australia, and I think to some degree to our detriment. because we don't always get to see the policy rather than the soundbite or the personality. So it's possibly an opinion of yours, but just interested in how that influences your ability to get things done.
Thanks, Philippa. Yeah, I think it's a changed landscape, and I've noticed, you know, I've been involved in, I guess, public life of one kind or another for, say, 10 years or so, and I've noticed that it's changed over that time. And much like, I mean, it probably reflects the politics in some ways, because depending on what news outlet you're listening to, what kind of opinion you're going to get, and opinion sort of breeds opinion. I think that was the point about that kind of criticism being public and, private sort of respect or whatever. It's exactly that, I think, because, you've got sort of commentators promoting an opinion that then I think that you sometimes, with a social media or digital environment, you get that kind of a bit of a pile-on of opinion. But you could argue that it was balanced in some ways, because you have sort of competing opinions. And I mean, there's certain news outlets that I never watch because they're pretty good at criticizing me, so I don't like, I'm interested in watching them. I sort of watch other news, I guess, but I think that's what people sort of do. They tend to kind of gravitate towards an opinion or something that fits with an opinion they already hold, maybe, as well. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I think obviously a diverse media landscape is really important. I think people, and I think something that, is probably a policy sort of space that we can look at, if we can't influence what the media landscape looks like, or how much balance it might have, or the lack of bias that might exist across the media landscape. How do we give people the skills that they need, particularly young people, to critically evaluate the information that they are given, so that they're better able to find truth amongst some of the opinion, I suppose. But it's a difficult question. Yeah.
Thanks, Philippa. Dominique, over to you. You have a question.
Thanks, Licia. And thanks, Bridget. Congratulations. I think you're one of the first, one of the only people to get re-elected with an increased margin from your team. So well done. My original question was, would you ever consider joining that crossbench? Or you can answer my separate question, which would be, what keeps you in the Liberal Party? Whatever you feel more comfortable answering.
Yeah, I'm comfortable answering both. I think they're kind of a bit one and the same in some ways. I have thought about it. Sometimes I still think about it, but at the same time, I remind myself, or try to remind myself, why did I join the party in the first place? And I try to relate it back to two things. Values, and those are the values as they are described in the We Believe statement. And I would argue, it was a pretty blunt thing to say, but I think that many people have stopped actually living the values of the Liberal Party as they are intended and the way they were designed. And we'll often hear commentary, and I certainly believe that, Menzies intentionally did not create a Conservative party. He created a Liberal Party, and we've ended up with a very Conservative party, and those aren't the same things. And so I think I'm reminded of the values. And I suppose linked to that, the second part is people, and it's the people of the Liberal Party. And I get a little bit distressed when I see, again, that kind of media commentary about, the Liberal Party or the LNP. We don't have an LNP in Tassie, incidentally, like it's a Queensland thing, I think. Just the kind of nasty party and, ultra right wing and whatever. And my experience here in Tasmania, and as a Tasmanian Liberal, has not been that. And like many parties, and I think we forget this part, is that parties are actually made up of people, like grassroots, mums and dads and grandmas and, you know, whatever, just people in our communities, which is actually no different to whether it's an independent movement or anybody who stands for election have a team of volunteers and whatever, grassroots people behind them. And the Liberal Party's no different. And so I'm reminded of those people. And those are the people who pre-selected me. And they pre-selected me a couple times now because they actually share the values that I hold. And so I suppose that's part of the answer. The second part of the answer is a bit more bloody minded, but connected, is that my strong view is that no one ever changed because they feel comfortable, right? You know, and so I did say to someone the other day, you know, I see that my ongoing role is to be the kind of sand in the oyster shell of the Liberal Party, just kind of keep irritating them until something good comes of it, maybe. But you know, it's I think that it's about values and people to me, and I guess connected to that is loyalty. You know, those people put their faith and trust in me. They've pre-selected me to be their candidate, and at the end of the day, it's about them. Nobody in Canberra votes for me. The people who vote for me are here. You know.
Thank you for that. I will tell you as an aside, I'm in Craig Kelly, or was Craig Kelly's seat. So unfortunately, he did not see that the same way you do, because he became, I think, independent while he was still elected. So thank you for that.
Pleasure.
Thank you for the question, Dominique. Always rely on you for asking one of the sticky ones. But I think, Claudia, do you have a question? That'll be our last question. If you take yourself off mic.
Thank you. That was great to hear your words, Bridget. So inspiring. And I watched all 3 of those events of yours in Parliament, and they were great. And so just on that, if you could choose again which hill that you would stand to die on, what would it be? What would be your hill that you would choose to stand to die on?
I would struggle to separate those 3 hills, and you know, I think probably goes to the last question in some ways. I feel vindicated. I mean, it's a horrible vindication in a way because many of my friends are no longer in Parliament, but you know, climate change, integrity, treatment of women, I think generally accepted as being pretty important issues to the Australian public, and I think every one of those hills was worth dying on. Religious discrimination really moved me at a really personal level. I think I've been like actually changed by the experience of that bill and the stories that I heard from people about that, and just like and those stories aren't fixed, incidentally, by that bill dying, and people live, you know, just in this constant sort of fear in some ways of you know, that kind of overreach into their lives. You know, 5 years yesterday since the marriage equality debate, for example, and you know, that was just such a difficult time for people, and nothing's changed. You know, nothing's changed in that regard. So that that one really probably had a really personal effect on me. Integrity should be a no-brainer. Like, honestly, like, well, I don't even know why we would argue about that one. And I feel the same about climate change. I mean, climate change is obviously of course a personal issue to people, but it's a global issue, and I really feel frustrated that we are arguing still in 2022 about whether it's a thing or what target we should have. Like, if there's going to be a debate, it should be about how we get there or what actions we might take, and it's reasonable to have those discussions, and they should be pragmatic ones, not ideological ones. So, you know, I just feel pretty frustrated about that one. That shouldn't be a hill you should have to die on, to be honest. But we just need to get on with that. But I think things like religious discrimination remind me too of how precious and how fragile sort of our democracy and our political institutions are, because that's threatened by bills like that.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm very cognizant of the time and we need to let you go, but if we could all do a collective kind of Zoom hands to say thank you for Bridget's time and for your leadership and for your candor today as well, and that we're very happy that you're in Parliament. And I know the women on this call are across the country, across the political spectrum, and some of you are running right now. In fact, Women for Election has 17 graduates running in the Victorian state election right now. We just helped a couple of women get elected in the Tassie local government elections and South Australia as well. There's always an election somewhere at some stage in this country. But thank you for your support of the work that we do, Bridget. And we really look forward to working with you with our forums in 2023 and beyond. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you to you for all the work that you do, and good luck to everybody that's currently running or thinking about having a run. Please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy for my details to be shared with anybody that wants to chat or would like any kind of personal unsolicited advice. Happy to help if I can. Yeah, happy to talk to anyone that would like to.
Gee whiz, what an offer. So everyone on this call has my email, so I can pass on email addresses from there. And know that we have one last masterclass event at the end of this month, how to navigate difficult conversations. That's run by one of our alumni who's now on council, who has lived experience and runs a conflict resolution business. And she is willing, ready, and able to provide a masterclass on that topic, which I think, whether you're running for office or negotiating with a boss, is still very valuable skills. So thanks for putting that in the chat, Carly, and we will let you go, Bridget. Everyone have a fabulous run into Christmas. Hopefully see you at the masterclass on the 30th.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.